So yeah, thanks Emma. I'm Catherine McLeod and I'm the Chief Executive of Dingleys Promise. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dingleys Promise first, just so that you know who we are and what we do. So we're an organisation that was established in 1983 in Reading, in the Dingley ward in the old hospital in Reading. And basically it was parents of children with SEND who were getting medical inputs, were getting sort of support in the hospital, but what they really wanted was play for their children, relationships for their children, learning and support from each other. So they set up at that point a family support group. So since 1983, we've grown significantly. So we now have 3 specialist early years settings in Newbury, in Reading and in Wokingham. And we deliver specialist learning through play sessions to children with SEND. We as an organisation, until about 6 years ago, were of, I would say, very typical specialist settings. So we took children, there was an assumption those children would stay with us until they went to school, and there was also an assumption they would go to special schools. So over the past 6 years, we've really focused on how specialist early intervention can lead to more mainstream education and more inclusion. So that's been our journey over the last 6 years. And certainly now a lot of the work we do is very much focused on how we can build wider inclusion and how specialist inputs can actually do that rather than keeping children in special education. So on top of our centres, we have a family support and outreach programme where we support families and make sure that they have the right support as early as possible. And we reach about 200 families directly annually. But in 2018, we also launched our training programme, whereby we're training mainstream nurseries, again, in the view of encouraging inclusion, but we're training mainstream nurseries to support children with SEND inclusively. And over the last year, we reached 1,000 trainees. The whole programme is now, we have one part of the programme as part of the Early Years SEND Partnership. So again, for anyone in the early years, it's a really useful website, part of the Council for Disabled Children website. We're delivering on the transitions for children with SEND to mainstream, to school, whether that be specialist or mainstream. And the other part of our programme has just started, and that's a 5-year programme with Comic Relief to deliver inclusion training to 31,000 practitioners across England in the next 5 years. So not a small thing. I mean, that's the development of our organisation. That's why we're involved in this area. And right now we are on the all-party parliamentary group for childcare in early years, as well as the representative to help those focused on early years remember children with SEND. And we're also on the Disabled Children's Partnership to help the disability organisations remember to include the early years. So we're that little organisation that sits there and reminds people not to forget this really important group of children with SEND in the early years. So obviously today we're talking about early intervention and the early years. The very first thing that I just wanted to do was just to talk a little bit about early intervention and why it's so important for children with SEND in the early years. And I think the majority of you are probably from schools. And so I just wanted to take this slide and the next slide as a bit of an opportunity to give you a bit more understanding of the situation really in early years settings, not necessarily in nurseries in schools, because it's quite different, the experience of school nurseries and the experience of PVI, private and voluntary organisations who are delivering early years programmes. So I think what the evidence seems to show is that the earlier the intervention happens, the better the life outcomes for children are. And again, when you look at all of the government research and what they quote at us, it's very much saying that in the early years, an investment there and the right support and intervention there has the biggest impact on children. I won't go into talking about how they say that and then they don't really invest in the early years. That I'll cut out, won't say that. But it's certainly the time that we have a really important chance to intervene so that children get the right support at the right time. And I think certainly from our organisation's experience, in delivering the transitions training, which has been delivered to schools and to early years settings, it's been really interesting that actually that preparation for children to go to school doesn't necessarily seem to be working that well. One of the major issues there from all the local authorities and settings and schools we've spoken to is actually that relationship between the early years and the schools. And so there's a really important part of this, that early years has a vital role to play to make things better for children, but also that schools and early years settings need to work together to actually share that information at transition and to really listen to each other. And at the moment, that is the biggest barrier to good transitions into school. It's that relationship between the schools and the early years. So, I think we, in what we do as organisations in the early years, we can only do it so well. And we've got to remember that actually those children are then going to move on to school, where the information and the strategies and the work that's been done with those children has to be handed over effectively. Research also shows that having some experience of the mainstream is better than having none. And again, some people might say, well, why would you try to get a child with SEND to, develop their skills and move into the mainstream if they're only going to move back into special education later? So again, that, the evidence seems to show that actually it is better to have some experience of mainstream, and that, again, that leads to better life outcomes for children. Again, from our point of view, as an organisation, we worked really hard to introduce an entry-exit pathway for our early years settings, whereby it really, really focuses us on the sort of the level of the child and the skills and the development of the child, and then the parents, their views, their ambitions for their children and what they want to happen, and then thirdly, the capacity of the next setting to take that child and have the right information to take them. And so in our experience, what that did was having that really clear assessment on a regular basis that parents were involved in, it really changed that transition. And what it meant was that we went from around 30% of our children moving into the mainstream when they left us to around 70%. So again, it is all about us all having the right, the strategies, the skills, the support for the child, but also not to forget that that early intervention is also about the family and about preparing that family and informing that family and making them part of that process. So I just wanted to mention that as something that's really important. So the early years itself at the moment, it's in a bit of a difficult situation, I would say, and I'm just going to talk about this very briefly. But at the moment, only 19% of local authorities report having sufficient places for children with SEND in the early years. And this is from the annual survey done by Coram. This is the 2020 version of that survey. And that number is actually going down as well. So it was higher and it's reducing. But of course, that's a pre-COVID figure, so potentially that's going to go down even further when we get the next report. So you've got a situation where there is a definite lack of places for all children with SEND in the early years. And on top of that, the Early Years Alliance found that 73% of settings said the number of children with SEND wanting to attend their settings was increasing. And at the same time, the waiting lists for therapies and assessments have massively increased over the period of COVID as well. The Disabled Children's Partnership also released the next figure. Around 58% of children with SEND in the early years have had delayed access to support and equipment. And I think when you take all of those together, you've got a picture of a lot of children who are in the situation that they may have difficulty in accessing early years settings. They have not had the therapy, the support, the equipment that they should have had. So we've got some serious delays in children getting to early years settings and accessing that early intervention, which of course will have lifelong outcomes for those children. And I think what we're all looking at is how we can make sure that there is as much there's as much specialized knowledge and capacity in the mainstream to be able to support those children as effectively as possible, because specialist settings, we all know, specialist places, there aren't enough. If you look at who would like them, I think what that is about is not saying we need to build more and more specialist settings, but it's about saying we need to build that capacity in the mainstream to get as many of those mainstream settings as possible to be able to take all the children that want to go there and not refer them on. And again, it's about those strategies and inclusive practice so that we make sure those children can study alongside their play alongside their peers and are able to I've lost my thread there. So anyway, so it's about them being able to play alongside their peers and not be stuck to an adult one-to-one support person, which a lot of times can lead almost to exclusion within the setting, even though technically we might say that's inclusion because they're all in the same room. So the last figure there is just, that's from also from Early Years Alliance unpublished research in 2020. And they found that 81% of early years settings have had to fund SEND costs themselves. The other really important figure is that 49% of settings do that on a regular basis. So at the moment, the system isn't working quite right for the support that children with SEND need. And so the sector itself is really in a difficult situation. You've got rising demand, you've got sort of a lack of spaces already. And then what you've also got is the fact that they're having to spend their own money to take children because the funding system is not quite right. So that obviously would go directly against inclusion. So, you know, it's a sector that's underfunded, underappreciated, wants to do the best, but I think we've got to make sure that they've got all the tools they can possibly have to be able to support those children effectively and, you know, without actually ending up not being sustainable and having to close their doors. So it's a fairly difficult situation in the early years at the moment. So I'm going to do the first slide, and Emma, you'll do the second one on MiniMove. Yes, yeah. So when we look at MiniMove, obviously I've talked about having better knowledge and understanding in mainstream settings to be able to work inclusively, but also to support the particular needs that COVID seems to have really exacerbated. On a national level, research is showing it's speech and language, it's social, emotional, mental health, and it's also physical development. So obviously, you know, in this situation, we're looking at physical development as something that MiniMove can really help with and help with that recovery physically in the early years. For us, as an organisation, we had a number of children where, you know, they don't have gardens at their homes, and so for months on end they were at home with no real support. But also, it's not just what's happening within the family and their own life, but it's also the fact that normally, especially children with higher needs and higher physical needs, they would have had an ongoing programme of therapy and support throughout that period, which they haven't had. And so certainly, again, looking at the you've got higher needs children seem to have been affected the most by the lockdowns. And so the more, you know, the more the need is, the more likely they are to be even further behind than they could have been. So no one's talking about catch up because, you know, children are where they are right now, but it is about as much as possible helping them to recover and making sure that we can minimize those long-term impacts. So again, with MiniMove, I think it's, you know, it's very much focused on making sure children have the opportunity to develop those functional skills in the mainstream, and then getting those practitioners to feel confident in responding to those needs, and also knowing when to refer, when to access support as much as they can. And I think the biggest message from sort of medical professionals and therapists at the moment is that a lot of the time when they do talk to practitioners about children in settings, they often find that the basics haven't been done because people sort of go, do you know what, I'm going to wait until a therapist is involved, and for now we'll just wait with that child. So I think it's about building that capacity in the pre-therapy sort of skills and abilities to make sure that children have as much as they can while they're waiting, because unfortunately waiting lists right now mean that a lot of children probably won't be able to see therapists even before they go to school. So I'll just hand over to you, Emma.
That's lovely. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for all your lovely pictures alongside your slides. They're so lovely to see children in real life, in real practice, so it's really nice. And I'll touch on MiniMove a little bit, as I know we've got another workshop later on, but it's just to sort of bring to light, and my background is nursery, so I used to manage nurseries. So when I got the opportunity, we've moved to where Charlotte suggested, how would you feel about doing something in mainstream with early years? I was the one that jumped at it and said yes, definitely, because I'm a big pioneer, just like Catherine, that it's such an important stage and it needs to be raised in the higher levels of our government to make sure that we're reaching all our children and not just waiting. So with MiniMove, this is just some stats, and some of these are a little bit conflicting with Catherine's, but we did discuss this as well, and we said it's really interesting why they're a bit conflicting. So Ofsted, our lovely Ofsted that a lot of our schools have to deal with all the time, fed back this year that children have lost those basic skills, and learning as a result of school closures has caused restrictions on movement. And as we know, especially with our little children, they learn by moving, they learn by doing and playing and exploring their environment. So when those restrictions are imposed on those children, their learning is affected from that. So again, it's a reason why we need to start promoting and supporting our children who are physically disabled to have opportunities to move and even maintain their abilities. It's not always about progressing, it's how can we help them maintain their skills. It also promotes the MiniMove programme that we're hoping to introduce in the next year, alongside the work with Dingleys and also Bevan, is the promotion and maintaining of that multi-agency communication. So I know from experience it's a really difficult situation sometimes where you've got a staff member that's not confident around health to have an effective conversation with a physiotherapist, an OT, speech and language. And what we want to do is just help promote and maintain those positive relationships, so that there's a clear communication, which will also result in better transitions to primary school, so those children have got a clear support package with them. And also, this is one that conflicted. So I got the I got the statistic from MenCap that most children within SEN attend mainstream schools, with less than 10% attending SEN provision. I think you got 20%, didn't you?
Yeah, Council for the Disabled Children said it was 20.
Yeah. But the overall message there is that there's a really large percentage of children that are attending these mainstream settings, and we need to look at how we can be proactive rather than reactive. So it's a programme where we're looking to help our settings feel prepared and feel comfortable and confident, so that when a child does arrive at their door and they can say, yes, we can support you because this is what we provide, rather than say, we'll see what we can do, and then that child misses out on the opportunities to access early education. And then I just wanted to bring in the code of practice. So it's a really vague phrase of theirs to say reasonable adjustments. And when you're a mainstream setting trying to help a child with a specific need, it's just trying to see how we can support that reasonable adjustment. What is that reasonable adjustment? How do we help them support themselves in an educational setting? So I just wanted to sort of shine light on reasons why we want MiniMove to be starting and how we can benefit both from a government level, but also hands-on level for our apprentices and our practitioners to feel confident in providing that support. So that's my little MiniMove pitch. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you. So what we wanted to do was, after the presentation, is to move through to a bit of discussion in groups. I suppose first things first, does anybody want to ask any questions right now? Anything in relation to what's just been said? If you do, unmute and shout. I think it's probably the easiest way.
Hi there. I just put in the chat about if you're aware of any organisations like yourselves in Scotland who are lobbying, like the Scottish Government and Education Scotland, because obviously, you know, we have a different curriculum to yourselves.
Do you know what? I was actually looking at that the other day because I don't think there is. So we've been asked to do some work in Wales as well, which obviously again is different. And so we were having a look at statistics in Scotland, which appear to, some of them appear to be worse. And so I think what we're going to do at the moment, we're just in the process of setting up a forum of organisations similar to ours. There aren't that many, but we're trying to find as many as possible. But I think what we'll do is actively look at Scotland and Wales and Ireland as well, just so that we can sort of get interaction across all four areas.
Yeah, that's good, because I mean, we obviously do have the same issues as everyone else, but yeah, just need that voice, don't we?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll definitely include Scotland in the forum. Fab. Okay, so Emma, do you want to put people into breakout rooms? And the two questions are, so firstly, what benefits can MiniMove bring to mainstream early years settings? So how do you think that could be useful? What are your views on that? And then I suppose the second one, which is probably quite meaty, is what barriers do you think there might be to actually having MiniMove in mainstream early years settings? So if you could go into groups and have a think about those two, please get somebody who doesn't mind to take a few notes so they can just feed back when we come back into this room. That would be brilliant. Welcome back, everybody. So what I'm going to do, because we've only got about 8 minutes left, I'm going to say, if one of the groups, if one of you are passionate about talking about the benefits, please talk. And can the other groups type what you thought in your discussion into the chat, if that's possible? So do I have a volunteer for leading on, the benefits that MiniMove could bring to mainstream settings? I'm hoping for no tumbleweeds here.
Oh, we'll have to pick up. I'll have to do the teacher thing and pick on someone.
I'm here. From our chat, the one of the biggest things is the changes of the cohorts that are going into SEN and mainstream schools, with the needs and the lack of the therapies input because of their such heavy caseloads.
Mm.
But also, I think it's looking at MiniMove and adapting it. How we're going to adapt it to suit the settings, really.
Yeah. And I think, it's probably a question for Emma. But Emma, when you do look at sort of the MiniMove content, how different is it from the school's content? You might know as well, Helen, actually. Sorry, I'll ask you.
At the moment, it's not, but this is one thing that came out from the training. It's obviously something, because Dingleys Promise is sessional, as opposed to like us at Brookfield, the full school day. And as you were saying, school settings are set up differently. But also, it's that the key thing, I think, is getting those families involved, getting the parents involved.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge part of the day that they can be practicing the skills that they're not going to be at preschool.
Mm.
So the key thing for me would be to get those parents on board.
Brilliant. And it's interesting. I think it's something that as professionals, and certainly in all the training we do, everybody says we know we have to involve the parents. And yet the biggest feedback from all of our training courses is we actually aren't involving parents enough. So I think it's across the board. It's something that I know early year settings do it well, and we're all aware of it. But actually, when we really reflect, there's so much more that we could do.
Yeah. I mean, even at Brookfield, with some of the older pupils, you see things that, and hear things that they're doing at school, but they're not doing at home, or vice versa. So it's that experience between home and school, or home and people, or
yeah, we've got which is another workshop with lovely Louise and her team coming up a bit later. But we're doing a project, so we've got Dingleys as one of our stakeholders who are looking at it for a critical eye of practitioner level. We also have a great project happening with Nair and Bevan, and I'm sorry to any Welsh people here if I pronounce that wrong. But we've got a project coming up where we're really looking critically at those stakeholders, such as family, and how we can really value their perspective. What does it look like for them as an early years parent? what do you first see, what's your experience, and we're really going to shape MiniMove around acknowledging those experiences and how we, because it's also a really daunting age to start creating support for your child from someone who is essentially a stranger. So it's just about how we shape that training to be also, as well as being curriculum friendly, the early years is an experience through play and exploration. So how we can make sure that that is still involving meeting the MOVE functional skills, but also being early years friendly and mainstream friendly and for brand new parents. But yeah, thank you, Helen. They were really good questions. Anybody else? I think there were some things in the chat. We've got lovely Louise. Hello, Louise. Absolutely agree. We need to do this to get the families involved. And then Miranda, we're supporting our feeder nursery in MOVE. And I think it helps give parents and families an insight into what their child can do rather than what their child cannot do. So yeah, it's that definitely that positive perspective of parents hear from day dot what their child isn't going to be able to do. And it can be very depressing and very disheartening. MiniMove can be that light where we celebrate their achievements, no matter how big or small they are, and celebrate their time at setting. They're still learning. It might not be things that are on the EYFS, for example, but they're still skills that are going to be able to be learned and support them, and they should do that in an environment with their peers, not separate too. So I don't know if you've got any input there, Catherine, of that can-do attitude of early years education.
Yeah, and I think you know, it is about celebrating every piece of progress, no matter how small. But also, I think when you oh, sorry, I've forgotten the point now. Sorry.
The can-do attitude.
Carry on. Can-do attitude, yeah. And again, I think it's where you have so many families who've been told they'll never do this, or they'll never go there, or they'll never see this, and then it's about that really working and showing what is possible. Because unfortunately, a lot of the time, even when parents are still with children in the early years, they've already had their sort of aspirations and their ideas brought right back down. And I think it's our responsibility to build those aspirations again, and to make sure that we're facilitating that as much as possible for all families. Helen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I think I've experienced as well with some of the little ones that we've had come to Brookfield is to try and get the parents on board to start with when they're maybe still grieving because of the diagnosis. And to have those aspirations is quite daunting. It's very daunting. And for us to come in and say, yeah, we can do this, you know, or have a go at doing it, is still a big step for some of those parents initially. So I think it's taking, I hate to use the pun, but mini steps with the MOVE program with parents with little ones in that age group.
I'm just, Emma, I think we're literally on time, so I'm scared to ask anyone to say anything else.
No, it's lovely. No, it's been really lovely. Just one more thing from Miranda, and it's been really great to have your engagement guys as well. It's been lovely to just have an active workshop rather than me and Catherine, who could probably talk about early years for hours, be engaged. I'm just looking at what Miranda said, Catherine, for you. So at the age the child is in nursery, they can generally be picked up rather than hoisted at home. So it's looking to the future for when their child is bigger. So yeah, helping get those functional skills learned early on to help decreasing potentially the amount of support they might need further down the line. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Catherine, to close if you like.
Okay, so thank you everybody for attending today. I really hope it's been an interesting conversation. It's not long enough. We could have done 10 times as long, to be honest. There's so many topics. But what I would say is, if you do want to discuss anything, access any information or any statistics, please do get in touch. I'm very happy. Oh dear, gone. There we go. I'm very happy to give any support to anybody or to have any discussions. Dingleys very open, so if you want any of our documentation or anything like that, we'll pass it all on. And when we get that forum set up, I'll make sure that it's not just England, it includes Scotland as well. So yeah, thank you everybody, and yeah, please do get in touch if you'd like to.